Thank you all so much. I don't know how much time we have, but I'd like to accept this award in the name of my late little brother, Bill.
Dorothy Malone won an Oscar 1 minute, then nearly died the next. Her husbands stole her money. TV producers fired her when she got sick. And when she died at 93, Hollywood couldn't even be bothered to remember her. The blonde bombshell who once shared the screen with Humphrey Bogart ended up broke and forgotten in a Dallas nursing home. This is the heartbreaking truth about the star they left behind. Dorothy Malone was born Dorothy Eloise Maloney on January 30th, 1924, in Chicago, Illinois. She was the youngest of 5 children. Her father, Robert Ignatius Maloney, worked as an auditor for AT&T, and her mother, Esther Emma Smith, took care of the family. When Dorothy was just 6 months old, they moved to Dallas, Texas. That city would become a central part of her life and identity. She grew up in a strict Catholic household and attended Ursuline Academy for 9 years before moving to Highland Park High School. She was a standout student, excelling both academically and socially. She was voted school favorite and crowned Queen of the ROTC. She also won awards for swimming and horseback riding. Even at a young age, she showed the kind of presence and confidence that would later make her a star. But Dorothy's early years were not without hardship. 2 of her younger sisters, Patsy Jane and Joan Esther, were diagnosed with polio. Her parents searched desperately for treatments, traveling across the country. But both girls died in 1936. Patsy was 5 years old, Joan was 8. The losses were devastating, but tragedy struck again years later. In 1954, Dorothy's youngest brother, George William Maloney, known as Will, was playing golf at the Dallas Athletic Club when lightning struck him. He was only 16. These painful moments shaped Dorothy's outlook on life, making her both strong and deeply empathetic. Acting was never her original goal. She dreamed of becoming a nurse and enrolled at Southern Methodist University, where she studied nursing and minored in drama. But fate had other plans. While performing in the campus play Starbound, she caught the attention of an RKO talent scout. He saw something special in her. At just 18 years old, she was offered a studio contract. She landed her first film role in Gildersleeve on Broadway, 1943. It was a small, uncredited part as a model. Nothing glamorous, but it was a start. She later said her early days at RKO were spent taking minor roles and working to lose her Texas accent, something the studio saw as a problem. For a year, she kept showing up, learning the business, and waiting for something bigger. Then RKO let her go. Just like that, her contract was over. That could have been the end of her career before it even began. But Dorothy wasn't ready to give up. She kept working, taking whatever roles she could find. At RKO, most of her appearances were blink-and-you'll-miss-it parts. A bridesmaid in Higher and Higher, 1943, a college student in The Falcon and the Co-eds, 1943. These films weren't major hits, but they gave her experience. She learned how to carry herself on set, how to take direction, and how to stand out in even the smallest moments. RKO had passed on her, but Warner Brothers saw potential. In 1945, they offered her a contract. It wasn't instant stardom, but it was another chance. During these years, Dorothy found herself in a string of B-movies. These were low-budget films, often overlooked, but they were also a training ground for young actors. She appeared in The Falcon and the Co-eds, 1943, as Dorothy Co-ed, a minor role, and in Higher and Higher, 1943, where she shared the screen with Frank Sinatra as an uncredited bridesmaid. None of these films made her a star, but they kept her working. More importantly, they put her on sets with big names. She worked alongside Eddie Cantor in Show Business, 1944, and tried different genres, from musicals like Step Lively, 1944, to crime thrillers like One Mysterious Night, 1944. She wasn't famous yet, but she was getting noticed. Then, in 1946, Dorothy got her big break. Howard Hawks cast her in The Big Sleep, a film noir classic starring Humphrey Bogart. Her role was small, just a few minutes on screen, but those minutes changed everything. She played a bookstore clerk, shy, intelligent, but with an undeniable spark. When Bogart's character, Philip Marlowe, walked into her shop, their flirtatious conversation turned the scene into one of the most memorable moments in the film. As rain poured outside, she closed the shop early, poured them both a drink, and let the audience fill in the rest. Hawks nearly cut the scene. It wasn't crucial to the plot, but Dorothy's performance was so captivating that it stayed in. Even with limited screen time, she stole attention from Lauren Bacall, something few actresses could do. Critics noticed, audiences noticed, and Warner Brothers noticed. She had finally arrived. But just as quickly as doors opened, new challenges appeared. Warner Brothers started casting her in predictable roles. In Too Young to Know, 1945, and Janie Gets Married, 1946, she played characters that fit Hollywood's expectations for young actresses. Hollywood saw her as the perfect girl next door, but that wasn't enough. She wanted bigger roles. She wanted to prove she could do more. By 1955, she knew she had to make a drastic change. She fired her agent. She hired a publicist. Then she dyed her dark hair platinum blonde. This wasn't just about looks. It was a statement. In a 1967 interview, she explained her reasoning. "I came up with a conviction that most of the winners in this business became stars overnight by playing shady dames with sex appeal." She wasn't waiting around for someone to notice her talent. She was going to make sure they did. The risk paid off. In 1956, director Douglas Sirk cast her in Written on the Wind. This wasn't another nice girl role. She played Marilee Hadley, the wild and troubled daughter of a Texas oil tycoon. Marilee drank too much, loved too hard, and lived recklessly. She was nothing like the polite bookstore clerk Malone had played in The Big Sleep, 1946. This was exactly the kind of role she had been waiting for. One scene in particular became unforgettable. Alone in her bedroom, Marilee clutched a model oil derrick and danced seductively. It was a strange, hypnotic moment packed with emotion. She wasn't just playing a part. She was making the audience feel every bit of Marilee's loneliness, pain, and desire. The film was a hit. Critics praised Malone for bringing depth to a character that could have been one-dimensional. Audiences saw her in a new light, and Hollywood finally took notice. At the 29th Academy Awards in 1957, she won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. When she stepped onto the stage to accept her award, she wasn't just holding a trophy. She was holding proof that her reinvention had worked. Now she had momentum. That same year, she reunited with Douglas Sirk for The Tarnished Angels. This time, she played Laverne Schumann, a woman trapped in a crumbling marriage to a stunt pilot. The film was based on William Faulkner's novel Pylon and explored themes of disillusionment and self-destruction. It wasn't a huge box office success, but critics admired its artistry. Many later called it one of Sirk's best films. That year, she also starred in Man of a Thousand Faces, a biographical drama about silent film legend Lon Chaney. She played Cleva Creighton Chaney, his troubled first wife. The role was challenging. Cleva struggled with emotional instability and a difficult marriage, and Malone had to bring those struggles to life in a way that felt real. She held her own alongside James Cagney, proving once again that she wasn't just a glamorous blonde, she was a serious actress. Dorothy Malone made a bold move in 1964 when she left the world of film to star in Peyton Place. At the time, television wasn't seen as a step up for movie stars, but Malone didn't care. She knew this show had potential. ABC offered her $10,000 per week, but she had one condition. She wanted to be home with her two daughters every evening and have weekends off. To make that happen, she agreed to take $7,000 per week instead. That was still a huge paycheck for the time, worth over $65,000 a week today. Her role as Constance Mackenzie turned her into one of the highest-paid actresses on television. Constance was a single mother with a secret. Her daughter Allison, played by Mia Farrow, had been born out of wedlock. In the conservative 1960s, that was a shocking storyline. But audiences connected with it. Malone did too. She was a divorced mother raising 2 daughters on her own, so she understood Constance's struggle. The show explored hidden scandals, family conflicts, and the pressure women faced in small-town America. Some warned Malone that moving to TV could hurt her career, but Peyton Place became a massive hit. It proved that television could be just as powerful as film. Then, in 1965, everything changed. Malone collapsed on set. Doctors found blood clots in both lungs and an enlarged heart. It was a life-threatening condition that forced her to leave the show for several months. Actress Lola Albright stepped in to replace her, but fans wanted Malone back. After a difficult recovery, she returned. It wasn't easy, but she refused to let the illness end her career. By 1968, her role was shrinking, and she wasn't happy about it. The producers wrote her out of the show, but she wasn't going quietly. She sued 20th Century Fox for $1.6 million, claiming they had breached her contract. The case was settled out of court, but her time as Constance Mackenzie was over. She never regained the same level of stardom, but she wasn't done with Peyton Place yet. She returned for 2 made-for-TV movies, Murder in Peyton Place in 1977 and Peyton Place: The Next Generation in 1985. Dorothy Malone's years on Peyton Place were about more than just acting. She fought for her career, her family, and her own independence. She proved that television was a place where movie stars could shine, and she did it all on her own terms. By the late 1960s, Dorothy Malone's career had taken a sharp downturn. A decade earlier, she had won an Academy Award for Written on the Wind, 1956, proving she could take on complex and dramatic roles. But Hollywood had little interest in actresses over 40, and the offers started fading. She took roles where she could, even if they were beneath her talent. One of them was Beach Party, 1963, a lightweight teen film filled with dancing, surfing, and romance. The beach party genre was popular at the time, but it was far from the intense dramas that had once defined her career. With fewer film offers coming in, Malone turned to television. She made guest appearances on Route 66, 1961, and Dr. Kildare, 1962. But these were small parts that didn't do much for her career. Then, in 1964, she found steady work on Peyton Place. She played Constance Mackenzie, a role that brought her back into the public eye. At the height of the show's success, she was earning $7,000 per week, a huge salary for the time. But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. Malone wasn't happy with how her character was written and spoke out about the lack of depth in the role. The producers didn't appreciate her criticism. In 1968, she was written out of the show. Furious, she sued 20th Century Fox for breach of contract, demanding $1.6 million. The case was settled out of court, but her career took another hit. After that, roles became even harder to find. For most of the 1970s, she was out of the spotlight. Then, in 1979, she returned to film with a small part in Winter Kills. It was a satirical thriller with a strong cast, including Jeff Bridges and John Huston, but the production was a disaster. The film ran out of money halfway through and had to shut down before being completed later. It became infamous for its troubled history. The film's producer, Robert Sterling Clark Jr., was later murdered under mysterious circumstances. Despite all the chaos surrounding the film, Malone's role as Emma Keegan was minor and didn't do much to bring her career back. A couple of years later, she appeared in The Being, 1981, a low-budget horror movie about a creature mutated by toxic waste. It was directed by Jackie Kong and had a strange mix of horror and comedy that confused critics. While the film later became a cult classic among B-movie fans, it was not taken seriously at the time. Malone played Marge Smith, a role that was overshadowed by the film's odd tone and weak special effects. Her last major film appearance came in Basic Instinct, 1992, a psychological thriller directed by Paul Verhoeven. She played Hazel Dobkins, a woman who had murdered her family years earlier. It was a small but chilling role, and even with limited screen time, she made an impression. The film itself was a huge success, grossing $352.9 million worldwide. It became one of the most talked-about movies of the decade. After Basic Instinct, Malone stepped away from acting for good. She had spent decades in Hollywood, experiencing both incredible highs and painful lows. Dorothy Malone was a Hollywood star, but her personal life was filled with heartbreak. She married 3 times, hoping for lasting love, but each relationship ended in disappointment. Her first marriage was to French actor Jacques Bergerac. They wed on June 28, 1959, in a Catholic ceremony in Hong Kong while she was filming The Last Voyage. Bergerac had been married to Ginger Rogers before, and Malone later admitted, "I wish Ginger had warned me what he was like." He was handsome and charming, but his career always came first. Malone would come to believe that he had only married her to boost his status in Hollywood. They had 2 daughters together. Mimi was born in 1960, and Diane followed in 1962. Malone wanted a stable home life, but Bergerac was more focused on himself. The tension grew, and by March 1963, they separated. Their divorce was finalized on December 8, 1964, but it was not an easy process. Malone accused Bergerac of using her for fame, which made their custody battle even more intense. She fought hard for her daughters and won. It was rare at the time for a mother to win custody, especially against a man in Hollywood, but the legal battle had drained her. She had already started stepping away from acting to focus on her children. She had starred in Warlock in 1959 and The Last Voyage in 1960, but after that, she slowed down her career. By the time she was ready to return, things had changed, and she struggled to find good roles. Even when she was back in the spotlight, she made her priorities clear. In the mid-1960s, she starred as Constance Mackenzie in Peyton Place, one of the biggest TV shows at the time. But no matter how demanding the job was, she made sure to leave the set by 5 p.m. every day to be home with her daughters. In April 1969, she married Robert Tomarken, a stockbroker. They had a quick wedding at the Silver Bells Wedding Chapel in Las Vegas, but within 6 weeks, the marriage was over. She had it annulled after discovering that Tomarken had betrayed her. He had secretly sold some of her possessions without her permission. The situation got even worse years later. In 1974, Tomarken was convicted of stealing $600,000 from Franklin National Bank. It was the biggest bank failure in U.S. history at the time. Malone had already moved on, but hearing the news only confirmed how untrustworthy he had been. Later, she admitted that she often believed in men who did not deserve her trust. Determined to find happiness, she married again. On October 2, 1971, she wed Charles Houston Bell, a Dallas businessman and motel chain executive. This marriage was less publicized than her first 2, but it still ended in divorce by August 1974. Bell's business commitments clashed with Malone's desire for stability. By then, she had left Hollywood and returned to Dallas with her daughters. She wanted a quieter life, away from the scandals and heartbreak. Later in life, she reflected on her relationships with a mix of humor and regret. She called it 2.5 marriages. a nod to how brief and disappointing some of them had been. She had been a Hollywood star, a mother who fought for her children, and a woman who never stopped searching for love. Her life was not just about fame and beauty. It was about resilience, survival, and learning to stand on her own. Dorothy Malone had the kind of Hollywood career that looked glamorous from the outside, but behind the bright lights was a life filled with heartbreak, financial struggles, and a constant fight for recognition. She won an Oscar, starred in hit films, and became a household name on television. Yet she spent much of her life feeling undervalued by the industry that once celebrated her. Her biggest moment came in 1957, when she won the Academy Award for Written on the Wind. It was a role that transformed her image, proving she could play more than just the wholesome girl next door. But when she stood on that stage holding the golden statue, the celebration was mixed with deep sadness. She dedicated her Oscar to her late brother, George William "Bill" Maloney, who had died in a freak accident years earlier. Bill was only 16 when he was struck by lightning on a golf course in 1943. He had been one of the few in their conservative family who fully supported Dorothy's dream of becoming an actress. Losing him was devastating. She had already lost 2 younger sisters to polio, and Bill's death left a wound that never really healed. But instead of letting grief consume her, she poured those emotions into her performances. Her role as Marilee Hadley in Written on the Wind was filled with the kind of raw emotion that only someone who had truly suffered loss could bring to the screen. The film was a critical success, and her Oscar win should have solidified her place in Hollywood. But even that kind of recognition didn't guarantee a smooth road ahead. Dorothy made good money in the 1950s and 1960s, but bad luck and bad marriages drained her finances over time. Her second husband, stockbroker Robert Tomarkin, promised stability, but the marriage lasted only 3 months. She later alleged that he had only married her for her money. Her first husband, French actor Jacques Bergerac, brought his own challenges. They married in 1959 and had 2 daughters before divorcing in 1964. Their split led to a custody battle, and while Dorothy received $250 per month in child support, she declined alimony beyond a symbolic $1 per year. At the time, she didn't need the money. She was one of the highest-paid actresses on television thanks to Peyton Place, where she played Constance Mackenzie. But acting careers don't always last forever. As the years passed, the roles became fewer. By the 1970s, her once steady income started to fade. In the 1980s, she suffered a life-threatening pulmonary embolism, which made work even harder to find. She took roles in low-budget films and television projects, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. In later interviews, she admitted she was frustrated by the way things had turned out. She had once been at the top, and now she was struggling just to keep going. Her entire career was marked by a feeling of being overlooked. Even after winning an Oscar, she found herself fighting to be taken seriously. Early on, Hollywood labeled her as the all-American girl, a role that limited the kinds of characters she was offered. She knew she was capable of more. That was why Written on the Wind was so important to her. It allowed her to break free of that image. But even after proving herself, she never quite reached the level of stardom she hoped for. Television gave her another chance. Peyton Place was a massive hit, and for 4 years, she played one of the show's most important characters. But behind the scenes, she wasn't happy. She wanted better material, more screen time, more of a chance to show what she could do. Instead of being listened to, she was eventually written out of the show. She later spoke about how difficult it was to watch opportunities slip away. There were roles she turned down, projects she missed out on, and decisions she sometimes regretted. Even with an Oscar, a hit TV show, and decades of experience, she still felt Hollywood never truly valued her. But Dorothy Malone never gave up. She kept working, even when the industry pushed her aside. She endured personal tragedy, financial struggles, and professional disappointments. But through it all, she left behind performances that still hold up today. Dorothy Malone lived a life that spanned nearly a century. She passed away on January 19, 2018, just 11 days before her 94th birthday. Her final years were spent in Dallas, Texas, where she lived in an assisted living facility. Even with all her success, she never seemed drawn to the Hollywood lifestyle. In her later years, she stepped away from the industry and settled in Dallas. Her final film appearance was in Basic Instinct in 1992. After that, she chose privacy over fame, spending her time with family rather than in the public eye. Her passing was confirmed by her daughter, Mimi van der Straten. She was survived by her 2 daughters, Mimi and Diane Bergerac, along with 6 grandchildren. Fans around the world mourned her loss. She was one of the last remaining links to an era of filmmaking that valued both glamour and depth, a time when actors left a lasting imprint on the screen. Her influence had been recognized decades earlier. On February 8, 1960, she received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 1718 Vine Street. By then, she had already proven herself as one of Hollywood's most versatile actresses. She had moved effortlessly from film noir in The Big Sleep, 1946, to gripping melodrama in Written on the Wind. She had held her own alongside legends like Humphrey Bogart and Rock Hudson. That star was more than just a tribute. It was a permanent reminder of a career built on talent and determination. But despite all she had achieved, one moment after her passing sparked outrage. When the Academy Awards aired their annual In Memoriam segment in 2018, Dorothy Malone's name was missing. Fans were shocked. This was an Oscar-winning actress, someone who had played a key role in film history. Yet, she had been left out. It wasn't the first time the Academy had been criticized for these omissions, but this one felt especially wrong. She had won an Academy Award for Written on the Wind, a film that remains one of the great Hollywood melodramas. Fans took to social media, questioning how someone with her legacy could be ignored. The Academy responded as they had in previous years, saying there wasn't enough time to include everyone. But for those who admired Malone, that explanation wasn't good enough. It felt like a sign that classic Hollywood was being forgotten in favor of newer names. Even though the Academy failed to recognize her that night, her true legacy remained intact. She had left behind more than just awards and film credits. She had left behind a body of work that still resonated with audiences decades later. Her daughters, Mimi and Diane, carried her memory forward, as did her 6 grandchildren. But beyond her family, her influence stretched even further. Cinephiles still admired the way she brought depth to her characters. Television fans still looked back at Peyton Place as a turning point in TV history. Her performances had never faded. They remained as powerful as ever. Dorothy Malone may have stepped out of the spotlight in her later years, but she was never truly gone.